In this video I will show you how you can connect other MQTT brokers to Waylay. For this demo I will be using HiveMQ, and let me create now one simple username password. For this example I will just use Waylay.io1. Later on I will remove that, but okay, I'm not gonna spend too much time here figuring out what's the best password. And I will be then requiring to put the same setting in the Waylay ingestion part. So what does it mean? Let me go here. I will need to get to the MQTT broker. Let me show you this one. Let me disable and remove this and let's do it from the beginning. I'm gonna add integration. I will go and say this is my MQTT broker for demo. I will need to put the connection string. This is my HiveMQ instance. I will say it's gonna be for topic, let's say trigger. I will keep all of these things free. They are used for Waylay MQTT broker later on. And let me just put stuff here, Waylay.io1. This is the connection string which I created before. And with this, I should be able to connect this MQ broker with our channel here. What does it mean? Is that let me disconnect and connect now again with the same credentials as before to my instance. And let me try to send a message. For instance, something like this, temperature 12, to test whether this message will arrive in our system. As I push that, you will notice now that message has been received. And the next thing that you will notice is that as we have not declared for which resource this payload is applicable to, the only thing that Waylay can do without any other intervention is to store that under the topic called here trigger. So what does it mean is if I go to see my resources, like in this particular case, trigger, we'll notice now that the last message which I sent, 12, has been received here under this resource trigger. Now, if you want to store that under any other resource than that one, then the only thing that we can do by default is to basically in the payload itself define that resource, and let's call that demo 1. And what happens now is that as I push data, now it will be stored under demo 1. Since this resource has not existed before, let me find it here now. We created by default one, and what we see here indeed there is only one value stored for the moment, temperature 12. If I now add, for instance, another measurement, 15, we will actually be able to see now that I actually stored 2 data points in our environment. So with that, we can have concluded that our data ingestion layer is working, that configuration works, and as well we can store data in our environment. Now, sometimes you would like to intercept the payload before entering into the system, and this is what I'm going to show next. For that, I have created one web script, and what we're going to do now is to try to do the threshold crossing and generate alarms. This is actually our alarms environment, prior to data being processed by our environment. So what we're going to do now is look at my web script, which I created before. And here we'll be receiving the message, temperature and resource. And as you can see here, we are going to process this message here. We're going to fetch the resource and data. And if the temperature is about 21, we'll create alarm in our system by the SDK, which enables us to basically use all functionality of Waylay. In this particular case, I will just generate alarm myself. Essentially, this can be also used to intercept the payload and do all other things and forward and store data differently, but let me just test this thing first. Now, in order to do that, I need to go to my configuration and associate this channel with this script that I just created. So what happens now is that I will send data, let's say it's value 22 for resource demo 1, and if you remember what needs to happen now, it's that we need to see the alarm. Let me just go here before I do the demo, push 22, and as soon as we see here indeed the temperature alarm has been generated. If you look at the demo 1, it has not received the latest value. Why is that? Because we didn't forward the values, we were only doing the threshold crossing. If we still wanted to store this value, because now we are using the web scripts, we really had to go back here and now explicitly store that. In order to do that, I'll just undocument this piece of code and maybe put it here. So what I'm doing now is that I'm forwarding and storing data and as well doing the threshold crossing. What does that mean? Storing means basically that I'll be storing data into the time series database, but forward means is that for every task which is subscribing to that resource, we will also push data to that one. So let me save this again, and while we are waiting for that to happen, let me try now to create the same use case, that is to say to do the threshold crossing on the value 21 and create additional alarm. So let me first delete alarm that was used before for the test, and let me now go and create a template that will subscribe to the stream data. What does it mean? Is we're going to take here $sign, will be subscribing to data. This is what I'm doing as I'm talking about subscription. I will use stream data temperature. This is the notation for a functional sensor, how to retrieve data from a stream. And we'll use the threshold value of 21. So if I do that, then I will have the same threshold crossing as it was in the web script. Now I also need to create alarm. So I could have done other things and sending SMSs or emails, but in this case I would like to do the same thing as before. I will create something like a temperature alarm test. Okay. Then I will make it as a critical. That will be my type temperature alarm, severity critical. And this time what I need to do now is to associate with the resource. I could have done it for any resource, but in this particular case I am interested in the same resource that I'm subscribing to. So that means that I will be inheriting that from the resource which is associated with that node. Again, we will do the same thing. We'll use the $sign. What does it mean? Let me read again. We do the function sensor. We are retrieving data from the stream. We are executing data. We'll be then on above threshold crossing, generate alarm. In this particular case, doesn't matter what I'm doing here because it's going to be conditional executed by this state here. And we'll generate alarm type critical for the resource to which this node is also bound to. And if you want to test that now, I will put that in a stream reactive mode. I will take demo 1. I'm now just going to create a resource, and all of this will be subscribed to the same resource as it here. And what we see now, let me put it in the log mode, that if I push data, again 22, oops, my window is gone, all right, and I'm pushing it here, what happens is that the value was above, we fired the create alarm, and it was then on the source, what you see here, demo 1, and if I go back to my alarms, what you see now, the 2 alarms have been generated. One was generated by the engine, while the other one was generated by the web script. Why is that? Because this task here was basically also subscribing to data and was able to create the same use case. Now, before we continue, maybe it's interesting to mention what if this threshold was coming from a metadata. So what we don't want to do is to hard code any of these values if we want for the provisioning to change these thresholds later on. So what we can do now is to basically go to the binding again. And for that, I would just maybe like to point to the documentation which actually talks about the data binding, or what we call a declarative binding. And you see here what are the things that you can actually do in order to consume data which is in the task context always available to all sensors. In this particular case, what I'm interested in is the threshold crossing. And let's call it a threshold. That will be associated through the meta binding to this resource, which is going to be called device1. Okay, as I'm saving that, and I try it again, what we'll notice now is that it's going to fail. And why is that? Because we do not have on device1 set any threshold. That's what we're seeing here. In order to solve that problem now, what we need to go back here is to find this device. So this was my device here, and add property threshold 21. Okay, so adding it here, we don't have to do any upgrade or any update, any stop and stop of the task. As we publish that now, what we'll see is that it took into account the threshold 21 and created alarm again. If we want to test again here, let me change this value to 23. Okay, and let me do the same thing again. We are publishing that, and this time it's a below threshold, hence the alarm has not been created.